So we have been in a conversation around this wonderful book called The Four Agreements. Many of us have had this book in our library, have studied it, are using it as a part of our spiritual life. And the Four Agreements were written by Don Miguel Ruiz, who put together the Toltec tradition that had been handed down through generations. And he says that if we have these four agreements functioning in our life, we can create and experience personal and spiritual power. 4, that's it. Christians gave you 10, right? Or I guess, so 4, that seems simple enough. However, once you start delving in, you realize, this is going to take some work. This is going to take some practice. The first thing he says to us is, be impeccable with your word. And so it is important that we understand the power of our word. This is a ministry of the word. It is a ministry that says that when we often say we're going to speak our word of truth. And we work from a level of understanding that says that there's a spiritual reality that is never affected by all of the stuff that humans do. There's a spiritual reality that is really what all religious traditions speak to when they talk of the one, the God or Allah or the Yahweh or the many names that humanity has come up for this thing behind everything else. And so when we understand that there's just one power and one presence and it's always available and ever present, then we realize that it must be wholeness. It must be at peace with itself. It must be all of the qualities of love and joy and harmony and beauty. Those are all the essence of the divine. And then we would suggest to you that then the divine takes form and expresses itself into being, into expression, into form, into reality that we would call reality with a little r. So I often say that when we look around at the universe in which we live, we would say this is the body of God. This is the outpicturing of the divine. So when we understand our personal and spiritual power, we realize we make a shift. And the shift is sensing that God is not something outside of ourselves that's sitting there playing favorites, that's deciding who wins and who loses and all that sort of thing. But rather, there's a divine intelligence that is expressing itself through creation, and we then are co-creative beings through the power of our word. Now, what is the word? The word is the divine idea, or an idea expressed. In the third creation story in the Bible, we have in the New Testament, in case you haven't studied up lately, it says, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word took form and dwelt amongst us. And so it's important for us to understand that we're not just talking about the words we use, though those are important, but the whole spiritual import and impact of the words that we speak. That we're literally co-creative beings with this divine intelligence. So when Don Miguel says, be impeccable with your word, he's suggesting to us, he says, the word impeccable means without error or without sin. Without error. So we can use our words to uplift, or we can use our words to diminish. As we witnessed the events this week in Boston and watched once again how a couple of people can do evil acts that impact others, we sense and feel and know that there must be a greater reality. You see, the fact that we are given the opportunity to experience the divine kingdom does not mean that we always step into it, does it? And so, once again, we watched how a few people sought to make an evil act through some, who knows, we'll figure out the rest of the story. But what I saw, was that is only one thing that happened this last week. Babies were born. People got married. Lovely thing happened. And even in the midst of what was meant to be hurtful and painful, we saw the best of humanity come forth once again. We saw, even as the bombs were going off, people rushing towards the bombs to serve their fellow man. We witnessed in Texas this week this massive explosion. And many of the people who died in that explosion were the first responders who ran into a situation and ultimately surrendered their life. So what I believe today more strongly than I have ever believed is what Eric Butterworth said many years ago in a chapter. He said, "Evil makes headlines, truth prevails." And I believe even in the midst of this whole unifying thing, if these bombs were meant to destroy us, all they do is bring us closer together. When you see acts of terror, it's so insane, and yet it has just the opposite effect. The people who kind of forgot remembered. And we remember what's important to us. So I come back to at a fact level, I don't deny what's happened. I don't minimize the pain and the suffering that people are experiencing. But what I know is that at the spiritual level, there is a reality that is transcendent of all of that. So our job as spiritual human beings is to keep recognizing the spiritual dimension even as we move through this world of form. Don Miguel says, be impeccable with your word. Use your word of power for good, to be a blessing. So that was good. And then we looked at the second point, which was, who remembers? Don't take anything personally. Now that was just 1 week ago. How did you do? Well, yeah, I'm sure you didn't mean my boss, that I wouldn't, you weren't talking about that, right? I mean, it's kind of a practice, isn't it? Not to take things personally. Because the very nature of all of us, if we're really honest, is that my universe starts with me, right? I mean, look at your life. Maybe it's different for you, but for me, I look at my life and I realize the continuity of my whole life is I'm the common denominator. I was there for all of it. And so while I'd like to make it about my parents or about this one or about the government or whatever else, I realized I was in the midst of all of that. So the practice of not taking things personally, there's a wonderful paradox of realizing that I am the center of my universe. I take full and complete responsibility for the life that I create, for the word that I speak, for the beliefs that I hold, for the agreements that I make. And yet, I don't have to take anything personally about what's happening in our world. So often, we get that confused. And I think it's simple. I think it's understandable. Because really, isn't it so much more obvious what other people should do with their lives? Right? I mean, and why wouldn't we want to share that, I find myself very gifted at figuring out what you should do with your life. It's my own life that creates confusion for me from time to time. It's where I seek guidance. So this wonderful walk of not taking it personally, which leads us to today. If you thought that was fun. Ready? Don't make assumptions. Seems simple enough, doesn't it? And then yet we look at our lives and we realize that much of the time we're spent assuming we understand how it is. Right? You see, there's a difference between assumption and agreement. And the assumption says, my reality that I've created in my mind is the way it is. Right? And so when I assume that I understand anything, then breakthrough can't be too far away. Because one of the things that I discovered, why I love this philosophy, why I love this teaching, is it helps us over and over and over to question our assumptions. You see, our assumptions lead to our beliefs, which leads to our habit. Have you noticed that? And so if we assume that life is out to get us, then we begin to reinforce that assumption with our belief, and we operate according to our belief, whether they're conscious or not. So if my understanding, my thought is life is hard, it's out to get me, people can't be trusted, all that kind of stuff, then I literally become this co-creative being with the divine to produce that experience. That's how much the universe loves you. It will give you whatever you ask for, whether it's for you, good for you, or not. So when we begin to understand and we begin to re-examine our assumptions about reality, it becomes rich and powerful work. How do I know this is true? What if it weren't true? Wow. What becomes possible if my assumptions about life were in error? What if money flowed easily and effortless to me and through me? Would you have a different experience of life? If that became your new agreement, and that became your new belief, and that became your new experience, would you have a different experience of life? Would you have a different experience of life if you believed that all of life is conspiring for your highest good, that everyone in your life is here to support your highest vision of yourself? Would you have a different experience? Would you have a different experience if you realize that there's always more than enough love in the world for anything? So Ruiz says to us, if we are willing to question our assumptions and to make new agreements, we can create a new reality. The reality that we experience now is based on the assumptions that we have held. It might be worth taking them out and dusting them off and saying, does this still serve me? And when we move from assumption to agreement, we find that the power is in the agreement. What if the same agreement that you made with lack and limitation, with not enough, you were to make a new agreement with more than enough? What changes? The universe didn't change. The universe was always fully orbed, fully resplendent in all of its glory. What changed? You changed. And when you change, it's as if by magic, things got different. So, understand the power is in the agreement. We spend a lot of time in this community talking about being in agreement, having healthy, strong boundaries, setting healthy, strong agreements with one another so that we might experience the fullness of our spiritual growth. I realized years ago that there's only two agreements. You've heard me say this before. There's only two agreements. One is yes and one is no. Right? When it's all said and done, behind every agreement that you're in, the ultimate comes to yes or it comes to no. And sometimes we have to negotiate our way to yes or to no. When we get that, then no becomes empowering. But so many of us are afraid to say no. What if they won't love me? What if I say no and he doesn't love me anymore? Right? Told you about the woman, a friend of mine who got married the first time because she didn't know she could say no. Didn't love the guy, but he asked. If yes is the only option available to you, your choices get very limited, right? I think by marriage 3, she'd figured out a few things, but that's a whole nother story. Some of us look at her and say, well, that's an advanced student. It takes me 4 or 5, but, whatever. So here's the deal. We can make a new agreement. If we question our assumptions and are willing to move beyond them, we can make a new agreement, and the power lies in the agreement. We become impeccable with our word. We no longer take things personally, and now we don't make assumptions. We make agreements. Yes or no. And if you say yes, let your yes be yes. If it's no, let your no be no. I'm so good with no. When I discovered that if I could hear no, I could hear anything, that I could ask for anything, I could be outrageous in what I ask for, because all you can do is say no, right? So the third piece and principle is let us be in agreement. And my invitation to you is that we choose to be in agreement with our highest self. Some of us made agreements with our lower self. Some of us made agreements with that part of us that believes in separation. Some of us made agreements with that part of us that believes in not enough, especially about ourself, about our deservability, about our worth, about our lovability. And I'm just saying, it's your agreement. If it no longer serves you, renegotiate. The universe is cool. The universe doesn't stop being. You see, when I go back to these acts of terror, the universe did not stop being a loving place. Some people just moved to the lower level instead of to the higher. It is our job as spiritual beings to stay in the higher realms of possibility. And it begins with us. So my invitation, my friends, is that you move into a new agreement with yourself, with your highest self, with that is within you. And I would tell you that you are loved and supported in being fully who you are. These are all the people that so lovingly, graciously serve and support us in our highest vision. I'm so grateful. Not to mention these kids. So will you just join me as we move into prayer? How good it is to know that there is one infinite divine intelligence, one divine life that delights in its self-expression in us, through us, and as us. And so we release in this moment any ideas of separation and move into the awareness of life, God, the divine, as our very life and being. And therefore I know that which is true for the one, that which is true for the whole, must be true for each of us. And we create a new agreement in this moment with that highest part of our being, with that spiritual self that knows truth and reality, divine reality, that we live and move and have our being in this presence of wholeness. And so we allow that wholeness to reveal itself through our bodies, through our life, through our affairs, as health, as well-being, as vitality. We make a new agreement with this divine reality that love is the order of the day. Joyously and fully we practice forgiveness. We forgive ourselves for those areas where we have made errors. We forgive those who we perceive to have harmed us. We move into a state of grace and love and joy and compassion. For there is that within us always that is one with the whole, and the whole is love. We allow ourselves to experience full abundance, joyously taking advantage of this spiritual kingdom in which we live right here and right now. Joyously giving, joyously receiving, participating in divine flow, knowing that our needs are always met and exceeded, knowing that it is the Father's good pleasure to give us this kingdom, and it is our good pleasure to accept it. We make a new agreement with the abundant life. We choose to be in agreement with that highest self, with that spiritual power, with that divine intelligence that only wants its highest self-expression through us. This is the truth that I know. And so I know we are blessed. We are blessed individually. We are blessed as a community. I know that this community is divinely guided into right and appropriate action, and that all that is necessary is easily fulfilled for our highest good. We extend a blessing this day. In particular, we extend a blessing to the people of Boston, the people in Texas, who have been so impacted by tragedy at a human level. And we know that love is the order of the day. The truth heals all. That love is making itself manifest. So we simply hold them in the light. We bless this planet and all of its inhabitants. We bless our brothers and sisters around the globe as we continue to know and work for a world that works for everyone. And as always, we bless all priests, rabbis, ministers, teachers of every faith. For we know there are many pathways to divine understanding. And so we honor and celebrate the many pathways. Wherever more of the divine is realized, we name it as good. Where more spiritual understanding is taking place, we lovingly support it. How good it is to be at one with the all that is. And so it is in joy and gratitude that I speak this word of truth this day, for I know that the word spoken has power, that the consciousness that we establish here together emanates in a sea of love all around us. And so with joy and gratitude, I simply give thanks, allowing it to be so, as together we say, and so it is.